Hi everyone, and welcome to this video looking at, again, still in the topic of consuming energy resources, but looking a little bit now at oil supply and demand. So, first of all, it's really important then to look at global pattern of oil reserves. So, oil reserves are the amount of recoverable oil. So, we're talking about what we call crude oil. So, this is oil in its purest forms. This is unrefined oil. So crude oil is then what we will use. We will refine it for various different purposes. But essentially what this map shows us here is that the darker the shading, the darker the colour, the areas that have got more of a reserve of oil, ranging from kind of obviously the sort of yellow and light orange areas up to sort of the dark red, sort of almost burgundy, and then kind of black areas on the map. So as we'll have looked at in a previous video, we can very clearly see that oil reserves around the world are not evenly distributed. The world's major oil reserves are found in only probably a handful of countries, generally with most of these being located, as you can see here, in and around the Middle Eastern region, with Saudi Arabia being the one that has the most of those there. What's really important to stress here, though, is that oil is one of our main energy resources. And because of that, because it's not evenly distributed, what you probably can gather from this image here is that it's in very, very high demand. So, importantly, oil production doesn't just depend on a country's oil reserves, though. It's dependent upon sort of kind of several different factors, which we're going to sort of look at in terms of here. So, oil consumption naturally increases as a country develops. And we live in a world now where more and more countries are developing, becoming wealthier. Therefore, we are needing to consume more oil naturally. Oil prices fluctuate massively. One of the things that I like to talk about with my students, and they laugh at me when I do, is obviously if you look at things like petrol prices change almost on a daily basis. They change between petrol stations, they change on a daily basis. And part of that is underpinned by global oil prices. Okay? So importantly, if we look at this, if we think about it, so increasing growth in the world's economies leads to a long-term growth in the world's price of oil. What we mean by that is the more you need something, the more something is going to go up. So if we are living in a world, and we absolutely are, if we're living in a world where more oil is needed, then we're going to be living in a world where the price of that oil is going up. If you have a resource in demand, the price of that resource is naturally going to go up. And naturally, people are likely to be paying more for that. Okay? If you think about it like that, then importantly, because global oil consumption is increasing, so is the price. So, for example, between 2015 and 2016, the amount of oil consumed worldwide rose by 1.4 million barrels per day. That's how we measure oil consumption, is sort of barrels. Okay. Importantly, within that as well, as GDP, so gross domestic product, increases, naturally so does oil consumption. So, what we will also find is that people in wealthier countries obviously have more energy intensive goods. And that's reflecting the fact that globally, about 65 to 70% of all oil is used to power vehicles there. Okay. In addition to that, where we've got countries such as India and China that are undergoing rapid industrialization, that also leads to an increase in oil production, as well as a boom in kind of industry and expansion of cities and so on and so forth. Okay, so because China's undergoing rapid industrialization, it doesn't have enough domestic reserves, so local reserves or national reserves, so it relies on imports of oil from other countries. Equally, more countries tapping into that demand means those powerhouses, so let's say Saudi Arabia, let's say Russia, for example, that have larger reserves of it, then tap into that and kind of go, okay, I'm going to put the price up a little bit because there's a bit of competition here. Short-term spikes in oil prices are often caused by disruptions, so due to conflicts, diplomatic relations, or recessions as well. So a lot of conflict that happened sort of during the 1970s in the Middle East caused decrease in oil supplies in some of the oil fields there, which led to shortages, which meant there was a price increase. Again, another example, so where it talks about diplomatic relations, there's conflict between Saudi Arabia and Iran, which has led to uncertainty about oil production. So again, that uncertainty then can help or contribute to driving the price up. Recessions there. So 2008, obviously the global financial crisis meant that industrial activities were lower or lessened, slowed down. So that again then caused prices to fall. But then equally, where we have rapid economic growth, we get rapid consumption, which therefore means that there is an increase in that price again. So you could look at this on kind of a line graph, and what you would almost see is that the price per barrel of oil very much fluctuates. It almost looks like a mountain range. It peaks and it dips, it peaks and dips. There's peaks and troughs, okay? It's not a continuous smooth line or steep incline. There are key peaks and troughs within that. Ultimately, as part of this, two very, very significant countries here, China and Japan, want to tap into that supply of oil, want to ensure that they are, as much as possible, receiving as much oil as they can. So, as it says here, China and Japan are eager to tap into Russia's supply of oil. Currently, they are dependent on reserves of oil from the Middle East. Now, there's a couple of problems with that. First of all is the issue of transportation of that oil, because in terms of China, a lot of it has to be transported via freight, so shipping containers, and in many cases that travels through an area which is controlled by pirates, so a lot of it that China pays for doesn't actually get to China, and also this then has financial impacts and also kind of slows down economic development as well. And Japan also has kind of tapped into this and wants to, very wealthy country, wants to kind of ensure that they are getting what they need in order to be able to develop. So China wants to ensure they have a reliable supply of energy, and part of the way that they want to do that is through this East Siberian Pacific Ocean pipeline, this ESPO pipeline, which you can see there in that diagram. So the oil will come from the oil fields and then it will go into refineries, or travel via pipeline, which will then go into refineries and then will serve China and Japan, for example. However, Russia is reluctant to commit to this. Russia sees China, Japan less to an extent, but Japan as well, as a potential threat in terms of development and also international global powerhouse. So Russia doesn't want to commit to a steady supply of oil going to China and Japan. But Japan is also obviously interested in the ESPO pipeline because it is the world's third largest user of oil. So ultimately they are investing large amounts to extend this ESPO pipeline at the risk of, potentially Russia saying, actually, we're not going to commit to the volume or the amount of crude oil that you want for various different reasons. And obviously that's potentially a huge kind of risk for both those countries, but also it's a risk in terms of them becoming, reliant on them. Ultimately, what China and Japan are trying to do is they are trying to reduce their own vulnerability to oil price shock. So they're trying to ensure that this pipeline provides them with a steady supply of oil. So if prices spike, they're not suffering as a result and they can continue to develop as they have been. Couple of things to think about here. This is a slightly shorter video because it's kind of a very small part of the spec, but I didn't want to kind of gloss over it and not include it. So important for you to think about, why are Japan and China trying to improve their energy security? Why do they not want to be reliant? Okay, how might this benefit them as a country, and also, I suppose, their population, socially, economically, and environmentally? And then think about, how can conflict between countries affect global oil prices? Look at instances such as the Iran-Iraq war, conflict in the Persian Gulf, that sort of thing as well, particularly in the Middle East. Think about international and diplomatic relations. Think about, obviously, some of those powerhouses, so Saudi Arabia, setting their own price, if you like, on oil, and thinking about how that can impact and influence not only, obviously, oil prices, but other countries and their access to it as a resource as well.